Last Duel Interplanet War 2012 is a 1988 scroll and shoot 'em up by the legendary Capcom, produced by the arcade. When people think of Capcom, they naturally think of several other games that they produced in the 1980s and 1990s. Final Fight, Street Fighter 2, Ghouls and Ghosts, all of which I've covered in this arcade port series previously. Capcom were one of the leaders of the arcade. Many of those franchises from over 30 years back are still widely talked about today, as well as new games emerging from time to time, such as the most recent Street Fighter 6. There are many Capcom games that are a little less talked about though, and Last Duel is definitely up there as one of those. If you love high-octane speeds whilst controlling a futuristic car and spaceship, or even both, while shooting down robots and tyrants trying to destroy you, then Last Duel is definitely for you. So, what is this game about then? Well, since you ask, Last Duel is set in the year 2012. And yes, 2012 has come and gone, and we never got anything in that year that looked anything like Last Duel in the real world, but we also didn't get hoverboards or even microwaves by Black & Decker that can expand micro pizzas into full-size pizzas. Anyways, it is set in the year 2012, and two planets known as Mu and Bacula are at war. The planet Bacula has a tribe which have pretty much taken over the planet. The tribe known as the Golden aren't happy with just conquering Bacula, they want more, and so the next planet to invade is the planet Mu. The remaining royal guards of Mu must stop the invasion and take back control of their home planet, and also to rescue the Queen of Mu who the Golden have kidnapped. Now, admittedly, for a shoot 'em up game, this storyline is fairly creative, let's be honest. So anyways, as in all of my arcade ports videos, we have several different home conversions of Last Duel to look at today, and so we are ranking from the worst version to the very best version that plays as well as the original 1988 Capcom arcade release. This could be quite the challenge today. For those of you who have heard of Tiertex as well as US Gold, we shall say no more and try to look at these conversions in the best light possible. Firstly, let's remember that most of these Last Duel arcade home conversions were released back in 1989, and then consider at this point that the ZX Spectrum had the 128K machines on the market before this game even came out, yet Tiertex coded this arcade port for 48K Spectrums only, which is fairly strange in hindsight since for arcade games like this one, the Spectrum could have seriously benefited from some extra power for powering this game. What we have here then isn't particularly a terrible game, but could have been so much better than what it actually was. Of course, it has that old school monochrome British look, which I always say you'll either love or hate. It surprisingly scrolls nicely, although just like most other versions, we don't get a full view as such, and so moving left to right requires the screen moving with us, which can get a little irritating. I will say at times it can be difficult to see bullets flying towards us, but that's a limitation of a Spectrum game, and most certainly a Spectrum 48K game. I will mention here that there was actually a 128K version which released many years later as part of a homebrew attempt, and it does play really well. Well, much better than this version, although just like in all of my arcade ports videos, we are just interested in the original releases. Is Last Duel for the Commodore 64 anything special? Well, it's an average game and doesn't overall really feel or even look much like a premium game for the time which US Gold put out for us. If I am honest, I used to play better public domain suck games than this arcade conversion. I think one of the main things which makes this C64 game sound very cheap is the sound effects. Again, it kind of sounds like they were taken straight out of the suck sound effects library in certain places. The speed of the game isn't too bad, but overly feels very difficult to play. I think possibly this version just plays way too fast, and this is very obvious when getting to the second stage. The worm enemy which emerges and then disappears midway through the stage is just unforgiving. It's hell, in fact. It was literally a crash after crash of dealing with this part of the game. I was also fairly surprised not to hear any in-game music with this version, and of course we all know that the Commodore 64 had the much superior sound chip compared with anything else in the 8-bit computer world at the time. Tiertex also gave Last Duel for the C64 a full screen presentation, which kind of ruins what they're aiming to achieve, which is of course the centralized vertical arcade narrowed look. Visually it's not too bad. There is much worse on Commodore's 8-bit best-selling computer of all time, although sprites do appear to be very blocky, and in true C64 fashion, the colours used are fairly duller compared with other versions. All in all, a fairly average game, but certainly not the worst by any means. Several Amstrad fans who accused me of unfairly rating particular Amstrad games for being lazy Spectrum ports, but you know what, I'm going to give Last Duel, which released in 1989 for the Amstrad, a good deal here, to a point that is. The first stage isn't too bad. There are a couple of flaws, of course. Now, when speeding through stage 1, the screen takes some time in catching up with you and can often clip out your sprite from the screen altogether. Rather than having a full view when moving left or right, the screen moves along with you, which can be a little annoying to be fair. But in all honesty, most of these versions has also got that issue. The action itself and even the graphics and sprites ain't too bad here for an Amstrad game. And let's just remember that the infamous Tiertex developed these Last Duel arcade ports after all, and so really is Last Duel for the Amstrad CPC such a bad game taking this into account? Well, I would say an average game. It does come apart though by the time we get to stage 2, and this is where playing an Amstrad game really does kick in. It becomes extremely sluggish when we get to stage 2, and it's such a shame because I was actually kind of enjoying playing this version. It's not a bad game to control either, although making the vertical jump was a little strange to be honest. Hit collision detection was fairly good here too. All in all, I would say that this is by no means a terrible Amstrad game, probably one of the best CPC arcade ports out there that I've covered in this series. This is Last Duel Soundless Edition for the IBM PC. Now, interestingly, there isn't much information about this version online, although it is by Tiertex, and that could explain why this version contains no in-game music, or even sound effects for that matter. It could have been that programming games for DOS was just a little bit too much for those coders from Tiertex, who knows. One thing that they did manage to pull off though is to give this an introduction song, which will make you jump out of your skin when it begins playing. You have just made a cup of tea and walking across the living room to your computer when all of a sudden a high-pitched tune blasts out. The tea and the biscuits are now on the carpet. Damn. The game itself just doesn't seem to play right having no sound at all. It does scroll fairly well and everything is animated fairly good too. In fact, it's not bad at all for a DOS game of this era, but it's a typical Tiertex affair, leaving crucial parts out which inevitably causes their games to be rated so poorly. You'll see some slight interference in this gameplay, no idea why it recorded like this, but I am guessing that my computer fried as it was playing introduction music to this version and made things malfunction. I'm not quite sure. To my amazement, another particular 16-bit computer was better than this 1989 Amiga port that was distributed to us by US Gold. Firstly, I found this Amiga conversion ever so slightly on the sluggish side, in that when speeding the vehicle or even just turning left or right, there was some delay in the gameplay screen following me, as it were. I was also hoping to see more of the gameplay area rather than having what the 8-bit computer versions had. That fairly annoying aspect where the left and right sides of the tracks of the first stage are not visible, and so sometimes when moving to expose more of the track, this can often mean instant death, as we are unaware if the enemy is right next to us as we turn. It just makes Last Duel unnecessarily difficult. Although we have some average introduction music, the Amiga version also lacks in-game music, sadly. The sound effects for an Amiga game are fairly average, nothing particularly special. When no action is happening on screen, it is literally just silent. There is no sense of futuristic speed sounds, and so it is rather dull in that department. I will maintain though that although Tiertex developed some absolutely diabolical games in their time, their versions of Last Duel really aren't the worst by any means. To remind you, I actually ranked every Tiertex C64 game a little while back. Check that out to see how terrible some of those games truly were. Now, normally I tend to criticise Atari ST arcade ports, but just like Amstrad, I am cutting this port a break and I'm actually going to praise it to put it in first place. Firstly, if you're aware, the ST tends to struggle with keeping up a good frame rate in many of the arcade ports that the machine received in its day, and this is simply down to its CPU being a little slower than, let's say, the Amiga CPU. But having said that, the ST port of Last Duel actually plays very fluidly, and didn't seem like there was much struggling going on when keeping up a consistent frame rate. Even when I speeded up as well as slowed down through the game, the Atari ST handled it extremely well. I was also surprised to see such nice choice of colour palette used here too, probably one of the system's most colourful games that I've personally seen. As you will see in the gameplay video, beside the track that I am driving on, you'll see a drop, and this drop colours up very brightly, almost like it is pulsing with different vibrant colours. Sadly, just like every other version, we get no in-game music either with this version, but I do think the sound effects here, although fairly rudimentary, they actually go well with the game. Now, of course, we don't get any super duper firepower upgrades with whirls of wind flying around on the racetrack, but the weapon upgrades are decent, and it's nice to see such a defined amount of detail in bullets that I am dodging as well as firing. Yes, this Atari ST port surprised me in many ways, and I truly believe this one deserved top spot for this. Anyways, that's it for ranking every arcade conversion of Last Duel. Which version did you have back in the day? And like I say throughout the video, to be fair, Tiertex actually did a hell of a lot worse than Last Duel, so by no means is Last Duel Tiertex's worst creation ever made. Anyways, like I say, drop a comment in the comment section and give us some feedback. Anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.